Brandon, since you can't choose between me and Tiffany, let's make this simple, Becca proposed, a wicked glint in her eye. We'll draw straws for you. Tiffany, standing beside her, nodded enthusiastically, clearly on board with the idea. We'll write the prize on one slip of paper, Becca said, shaking the folded slips in a small box. Whoever draws, it gets to be the new Mrs. Shaw. Deal. Brandon Shaw looked at the two women he'd known his entire life. Becca was all sharp angles and cunning smiles. Tiffany, a picture of eager anticipation. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach, but for the sake of their long history, he gave a reluctant nod. He never should have trusted them. Becca, in a classic bait-and switch, didn't draw first as she'd promised. Instead, she grabbed a passing waitress, a young woman who looked barely out of her teens, and physically forced the girl's hand into the box. The waitress was utterly bewildered. Before she could react, Becca had snatched the slip of paper from her fingers and unfolded it with a triumphant flourish. "Ah, the prize!" Becca shouted, displaying the paper for everyone to see. Brandon stared at the words, the veins on the back of his hand standing out in sharp relief. Of course it said the prize. He knew it would. When they'd first suggested this twisted game, he'd asked what would happen if someone else drew the slip. Becca had assured him with a conspiratorial wink, "It's just for show. I wrote the prize on all the slips. I'll draw first, so obviously, I'll be the one to marry you." Tiffany had immediately argued that she should be the one to draw first. Seeing they had it all figured out, Brandon hadn't wanted to ruin their fun. So he'd agreed, but he never imagined they would do this. Now, Becca shot a smug look at Caleb Reed, who was sitting nearby, before turning back to Brandon, her voice dripping with provocation. "Well, Brandon, this mute waitress drew the winning ticket. According to the rules, you have to marry her." Brandon's gaze snapped to Caleb, his eyes blazing. Caleb was a scholarship student his family's foundation supported. He now sat there with a look of calm indifference, as if he'd known this was going to happen all along. Had the three of them conspired together, leaving him the only one in the dark? The young waitress, though unable to speak, could hear perfectly. Realizing she was the butt of a cruel joke, she began waving her hands frantically, refusing in sign language. Becca scoffed. "You're a waitress. A mute one at that. Do you have any idea who Brandon Shaw is? He's the sole heir to the Shaw fortune, the wealthiest family in Seaport City. He's offering to marry you, and you have a nerve to refuse. Know your place." The waitress's expression dimmed, her hands falling limply to her sides. She knew that in this ballroom, surrounded by the city's elite, she was a fish on a cutting board, utterly at their mercy. Brandon remained silent, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Tiffany, sensing the tension, tried to smooth things over. "Brandon, Becca's just joking. You can't seriously be thinking of marrying this girl," she said, her voice laced with manufactured sweetness. "She's just mad because you embarrassed Caleb at dinner. Just apologize to him, and we can all forget this happened." The final piece clicked into place. Brandon looked at Becca, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This whole game, this was all for Caleb?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "You were willing to make a mockery of my marriage, of my life for him." Brandon's gaze darted between Tiffany and Becca. Tiffany couldn't meet his eyes. Becca, though she flushed with a flicker of embarrassment, doubled down. "If you don't apologize, you have to marry her." Seeing that Brandon was ignoring Caleb and had no intention of apologizing, Becca grew bolder. She grabbed the waitress and shoved her roughly toward Brandon. "You're about to be his wife. Why don't you get acquainted?" Caught off guard, the waitress stumbled, about to fall. In a flash, Brandon shot out an arm, catching her and pulling her into a half embrace. He held her just long enough for her to regain her balance before letting go. The girl, who looked to be in her early 20s, had a delicate face now etched with panic. Brandon exchanged a few brief sentences with her in American Sign Language, quickly getting her basic story. Meanwhile, Becca's mocking voice cut through the air again. "The great Brandon Shaw, marrying some low-class, mute waitress. You're going to be the laughingstock of our entire circle. You'll disgrace the Shaw name." And, before she could finish, Brandon's voice cut her off, clear and firm. "I'll marry her." As Brandon's resolute words echoed through the room, The buzz of conversation died instantly. The sneer on Becca's face froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. What did you just say? Brandon's gaze was unwavering. I said, I'll follow the rules of your game. I'm going to marry her. He took the waitress's wrist, his grip firm but reassuring, a silent promise of security. Tiffany, panicked, rushed forward to try and salvage the situation. Brandon has to be kidding. He loves me and Becca. He'd never just marry some random girl. On the couch, a complex emotion flickered in Caleb's eyes before vanishing. A small, detached smile played on his lips. I think Brandon is just putting on a show for everyone, he mused aloud. He's not serious. Once this all blows over, he'll just pay her off. For the Shaw family, that's nothing. Becca and Tiffany immediately seized on this explanation. Their panic subsided, replaced by an undisguised look of disgust as they looked at Brandon. Brandon, we had a deal. Whoever drew the slip gets to marry you. Don't back out now. That wouldn't be very manly of you, Becca taunted. Their scorn was like a physical blow, and the revulsion in their eyes made it hard for Brandon to breathe. It hadn't always been like this. He remembered his childhood diagnosis of severe autism. He had been locked in his own world, shutting out everything and everyone. Doctors had warned he might never integrate into society. Then he was abducted. Becca and Tiffany, walking home from school, saw what happened. The two little girls had been unbelievably brave, confronting the kidnapper to save him. Becca's neck was bruised red from the man's grip, and Tiffany's arm was cut. Let them go. I already called the police. It was the first time he had ever spoken, the words torn from him in a moment of pure terror for their safety. With the help of a passerby, they were saved, and the kidnapper was arrested. After that day, the girls became his bridge to the world. He stopped shying away from them, forcing himself to overcome his psychological barriers. Slowly, his autism receded. They grew up together, the closest of friends. They always had his back. When someone broke his model car, they would tear the kid a new one. When they were the targets of vicious rumors, he would move heaven and earth to find the source and set the record straight. Over time, it seemed their friendship had blossomed into something more. Everyone in their social circle knew they were in love with him and assumed he would marry one of them. It was why his family never tried to set him up. But everything changed when Caleb Reed appeared. Caleb was one of the many students who had received a scholarship from the Shaw Foundation. After graduating from college, he insisted on taking Brandon to dinner to thank him. He was so full of self-deprecating humility that, to protect the guy's pride, Brandon went. Becca and Tiffany came along. After that one brief meeting, the girls started spending less and less time with him and more time with Caleb. Brandon had assumed they were just outgoing people with a lot of friends. But now, seeing them use his marriage as a toy to entertain Caleb, he finally understood. Caleb had replaced him in their hearts. Brandon took a deep breath, his voice calm but resolute. You seem to have forgotten something. I don't make jokes. Ever. Brandon's statement made Becca and Tiffany freeze. They knew it was true. Because of his childhood, he was famously, unervingly sincere. They remember the time they'd casually mentioned it would be fun to have a pet pot-bellied pig. Without a word, Brandon had disappeared into the mountains and actually came back with one. He had shown up covered in scratches, his clothes torn, but clutching the tiny piglet to his chest. The two girls had been stunned. The Shaw's estate manager had later told them, with a dramatic flair, that Brandon had cornered several wild pigs, but rejected them all, insisting he had to find a small one for them. It was then they realized that for Brandon Shaw, his word was his bond. How could they have forgotten? As Brandon instructed a member of the staff to escort the waitress to a guest room, Becca's face hardened. She shoved the waitress again. Then, she turned to Brandon, her tone icy. Brandon, this was supposed to be a lesson. It's what you get for humiliating Caleb at dinner, Tiffany added, chiming in. Why would you bully him? It's not his fault he comes from a poor family. As long as you apologize to Caleb, we'll drop this whole thing about you marrying the mute. They kept circling back to the dinner, trying to paint him as the villain. Brandon finally snapped, his expression darkening. Are you sure I was the one humiliating him? He pulled the waitress, who had been shoved back and forth like a doll, behind him. He poured her a glass of water and told her to sit and wait. Then he turned back to Becca and Tiffany, his voice a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Do you have any idea what actually happened at that table? Under the guise of studying psychology, Caleb kept grilling me about my autism. You both know how hard that time was for me, how I clawed my way out of that darkness. His incessant questions were just a way to rip open old wounds, to tear apart the scar tissue and pour salt on it. My own doctors warned me not to dwell on the past, or I could relapse. When has psychology ever been about torturing people with their trauma? My own therapist never forced me to relive things I didn't want to talk about. All I did was tell him to stop, and that's humiliating him. He wallows in self-pity, and you two fall for it. That's your business. But your need to comfort him is based on turning me into a clown. This ends now. From this point on, we go our separate ways. Brandon let it all out, a torrent of frustration and hurt that had been building for months. Everyone in the room was silent, stunned. In their minds, Caleb was the underdog who deserved sympathy, while Brandon was the privileged one who, if he had only one piece of candy, would be expected to give it to Caleb without a second thought. They had all forgotten how lonely it must have been for the boy who had to watch the world from behind a wall of silence. Becca and Tiffany exchanged a look, a flicker of guilt crossing their faces. They knew they had gone too far. Just as they were about to speak, Caleb rushed over and grabbed their sleeves. "It's all my fault," he said, his voice trembling. "I've caused a misunderstanding between you and Brandon. I'm the one to blame. I'll leave. I'll never bother you again." His fair skin and boyish face, now framed by reddened eyes, made him look like a kicked puppy. Becca's heart instantly melted. She instinctively grabbed his arm. "You're not going anywhere," she said fiercely. "We want to be your friend, and no one is going to stop us." Tiffany quickly backed her up. "This has nothing to do with you. You don't have to blame yourself. If anyone's to blame." Her gaze turned sharp and cold as she glared at the waitress. "It's this mute girl who doesn't know her place, fantasizing about marrying Brandon. Get the hell out of here." Brandon saw the waitress flinch. Tiffany's twisted logic was so absurd it was almost laughable. How had he never seen this side of them before? He had been so blind. As the waitress prepared to leave, head bowed in submission, Brandon once again took her by the wrist. He looked coldly at Becca and Tiffany. "I'm going to say this one last time. I, Brandon Shaw, never go back on my word. From now on, you will show her some respect. She is not the mute. She is your future sister-in-law." The words landed like a slap. Becca and Tiffany's faces contorted with rage, but their eyes still held nothing but contempt for Brandon's unknown fiancé. "Brandon, I'd like to see you actually go through with this," Becca sneered. With that, the two of them stormed out, dragging Caleb with them. The other guests quickly followed, and the grand birthday gala ended on a sour note. Brandon's grandfather looked at him, his eyes filled with a deep, unreadable expression. Finally, he spoke. "You made this mess, son. You'll be the one to clean it up. You've made a public declaration. Don't you dare make this family a laughingstock. If you do, I'll be the first one to break your legs." "I understand, Grandpa." After seeing his grandfather out, Brandon was left alone in the vast, empty ballroom with the waitress. She kept her head down, her slender fingers twisting together nervously. Brandon suddenly remembered something. Earlier, when Caleb had been relentlessly questioning him, everyone else had been silent, curious, or secretly pleased. Only this young waitress had stood up, gesturing frantically. Others hadn't understood, but Brandon, who had learned sign language because of his autism, knew exactly what she was saying. "Don't talk about it. It could cause a relapse." When Caleb either didn't understand or chose to ignore her, she had even tried to cover his mouth with a napkin in desperation. That was what had drawn Becca and Tiffany's attention to her in the first place, making her the pawn in their cruel game. Thinking of this, Brandon looked at the girl with a new sense of guilt. He had dragged her into this. Although he had already learned through sign language that she was single, with no fiancé or boyfriend, he still motioned for her to sit down. He was about to ask if she felt wronged by the situation, but she signed first. "It's my fault. I got you into this mess." Brandon shook his head. "No, and I meant what I said. I want to marry you." He looked at her face, as pure and delicate as a lily, with its exquisite features. He'd never given much thought to beauty before, but looking at her now, he felt a sense of peace and quiet joy. He had never known what kind of wife he wanted, but suddenly, the thought of spending the rest of his life with the girl in front of him filled him with an unexpected sense of hope. He signed slowly, making sure she understood each word. The Shaw family has a creed: one life, one love. Anyone who breaks it is disowned, removed from the family records, and cut off completely. I will do everything in my power to make you happy. Will you give me that chance? Their eyes met. The girl looked at Brandon's handsome, earnest face. It was the same face from a few years ago, the same face from her dreams. His eyes were deep but clear, like a lake you could see straight to the bottom of. Right now, those clear eyes reflected her own blushing face. Her heart skipped a beat. She nodded, her hands forming the words slowly but deliberately. I will. Her name, Brandon learned, was Seraphina Monroe. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. She mentioned in passing that she was on her own, offering no details about her past. Brandon assumed she was an orphan. At his grandfather's urging, he arranged for her to stay at the Shaw estate. To salvage the family's reputation, his grandfather wanted them married as soon as possible, setting the date for 2 weeks from now. To get to know each other better, they decided to live under the same roof. Of course, until the wedding, Sarah would stay in a guest suite. The next morning, when Brandon woke up, the dining table was laden with breakfast. He assumed the household staff had prepared it, but on closer inspection, the dishes were unfamiliar. As he stood there puzzled, Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a bowl of steaming soup. The head of staff, who had a casual and friendly relationship with Brandon, smiled at him. Miss Monroe was up before dawn. She insisted on making you breakfast herself. I told her it was our job, but she wouldn't listen. And look at this spread. Her cooking is far better than ours. You have to try it, Mr. Shaw. Brandon didn't hesitate. He rolled up his sleeves, took the bowl from Sarah's hands, and said seriously, You don't have to cook. We have staff for that. If you do their work, it makes them uncomfortable. Besides, he added, You're going to be my wife, not my housekeeper. If you're bored, I'll take you out later. We can buy whatever you like. I just want you to do the things you enjoy. Sarah smiled and signed. I enjoy cooking. When she was abroad, she had never liked having help and always did things herself. For her, cooking wasn't just a survival skill. It was a form of therapy. Just as some people relaxed with music or a TV show, she found peace in creating meals. Especially, she stole a quick glance at Brandon, her eyes sparkling. Cooking for someone she cared about gave her an even greater sense of fulfillment. Brandon's heart warmed. He smiled back. If you really love it, next time we'll cook together. I'll help you. He wasn't thinking about anything other than the simple pleasure of doing something with the woman he was growing to admire. Old Mr. Shaw, despite claiming he wouldn't interfere, was deeply invested in the marriage of his only grandson. Using the excuse of being lonely, he moved in with Brandon to observe. Seeing Brandon and Sarah communicate exclusively in sign language, he frowned and turned to the estate manager. I thought she could hear perfectly fine, just couldn't speak. Why isn't Brandon talking? What are they saying? Translate for me. The manager, who had learned some ASL to better communicate with a younger Brandon, relayed their simple, affectionate conversation. Sir, haven't you noticed? When they sign to each other, it's like no one else exists in the room. A look of understanding dawned on the old man's face. He grunted. That boy. After breakfast, Brandon took Sarah out. He expected her to want to shop for clothes, bags, or jewelry. Instead, she led him straight to a music store and began examining a wide array of instruments. Seeing her passion, Brandon assumed she wanted to learn and, without a second thought, bought everything she pointed at. He even had a large storage room at the estate converted into a dedicated music studio. Once everything was set up, he tentatively asked Sarah if she needed a music teacher. She simply smiled, walked over to the grand piano, and sat down gracefully. 6. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 filled the room, a cascade of sound that was at times powerful and exuberant, at others delicate and melancholic. Brandon was completely captivated, lost in the music. He only snapped out of his trance when he felt Sarah's gentle gaze on him. An indescribable mix of emotions swirled within him. He knew the piece was famous not just for its emotional depth, but for its staggering technical difficulty. Yet, Sarah played it with a mastery that was breathtaking. Seeing his silence, Sarah thought he hadn't enjoyed it. She signed, Do you like the harp? Brandon, still reeling, asked, You play the harp too? Sarah smiled, moved to the large concert harp, and with a light touch of her fingers, drew forth a soothing, ethereal melody. The sound was so pure it felt like it could wash away the world's impurities, transporting him to a place of serene, pastoral beauty. Brandon felt more and more that Sarah was a treasure trove of hidden talents, waiting to be discovered. The rest of the afternoon turned into Sarah's private concert. She was a one-woman orchestra. Every instrument in the room seemed to come alive in her hands, producing one beautiful melody after another. The entire household staff was drawn to the music, their initial respect for Sarah turning into outright awe. When the music finally faded, Sarah looked at Brandon expectantly, like a student awaiting a professor's critique. A rare flush of unease crossed Brandon's face. He signed awkwardly. "I'm a complete amateur. I wouldn't dare comment." The estate manager, knowing Brandon's reserved nature, stepped in with a good-natured laugh. "Come on, Mr. Shaw, just say it. Did you like it?" Brandon nodded enthusiastically. "Sarah is incredible. I loved it," he said, then added with heartfelt sincerity, "Of course, even if she wasn't incredible, as long as she's Sarah, I would love it." A ripple of soft, warm laughter went through the staff. A blush crept up Sarah's cheeks, and she shyly lowered her head. Outside the door, old Mr. Shaw witnessed the entire scene, his expression growing more thoughtful. He had initially pegged Sarah as shy and insecure, but the more he observed her, the more he saw a woman who carried herself with the poise and grace of someone from a distinguished background. Her quiet dignity was far beyond that of the typical socialites he knew. He mused to himself that the kind of culture and refinement Sarah possessed couldn't come from an ordinary family. It was time, he decided, to do a little digging into her past. Brandon had always preferred quiet, but to fit into Becca and Tiffany's world, he had forced himself to endure parties and social gatherings he disliked. Sarah was different. She seemed to instinctively understand him and shared his tastes. When he worked from his home office, she would sit quietly on the sofa, reading, never disturbing him. When he looked up, he would always find her with a serene, gentle expression. Feeling his gaze, she would smile, bring him a cup of tea, and they would toast silently, their affection growing in the quiet understanding between them. When she was in the mood to bake, he would drop his work without hesitation to help her whisk eggs and knead dough. Her nimble fingers would create an array of adorable pastries for their afternoon tea. When he worked out in the home gym, she would join him, occasionally trying a few couples fitness poses, though always playfully, never crossing a line. Sarah was also a brilliant chess player. When his grandfather was playing against himself out of boredom, she would step in and give the old man a formidable challenge. They say you can judge a person by their chess game. Though Sarah would subtly let his grandfather win a few pieces, her strategy was sharp and fluid, her defense impenetrable, and her approach to victory steady and calculated. The old man couldn't help but recall how, on several occasions when Brandon was struggling with a complex issue at Shaw Industries, Sarah had offered a solution that was astonishingly insightful and effective. As he watched her now, his grandfather's gaze grew deeper still. 7. With the wedding just around the corner, Brandon took Sarah to pick up their rings. They went straight to Aurelia. In the elite circles of their city, the name Aurelia was synonymous with unparalleled luxury. Its bespoke jewelry pieces were masterpieces, especially its signature ring, marketed as the one for the one, which was a massive status symbol for affluent couples. A few days prior, Brandon had placed a custom order based on Sarah's ring size. Today, they were here to collect the finished product. But the moment they stepped inside, they saw Caleb Reed. He was standing with his eyes fixed on an emerald pendant in a display case. "I hear this Buddha's head pendant can change your luck. Mine's been terrible lately. I think I've made some enemies," Caleb muttered to himself. "It's just a pendant. If you like it, I'll buy it for you," Tiffany's voice cooed from nearby, eager to please. Becca glanced at the pendant with disdain. "It's just a stupid Buddha head. Caleb, try on this Rolex. It would look so much better on you." "Thank you, Becca." "Thank you, Tiffany. You're both so good to me," Caleb said, his face a mask of grateful humility. These three, Brandon thought, they're like a bad rash. He tried to turn and leave quietly, but Tiffany's sharp eyes caught him. "Brandon, what are you doing here?" she asked with faint surprise. "What else does one do in a jewelry store?" Brandon replied coolly, his annoyance showing. Becca, apparently displeased with his tone, immediately went on the attack. "Brandon, we already told you. All you have to do is apologize to Caleb, and we can let this whole thing go. Are you bringing this mute here just to provoke us? Brandon could only laugh internally. He had explained himself perfectly clearly that night, yet they still believed he was in the wrong. Was he just supposed to bow and scrape before Caleb and let them walk all over him? I did nothing wrong. Why would I apologize to him? Brandon said, his voice flat and hard. And provoke you? Do you really think you're important enough for me to go to that much trouble? Brandon, what's that supposed to mean? Becca and Tiffany demanded in unison, their faces flushed with anger. You think you're hot stuff now? Getting a big head? Is it this mute girl? Is she whispering things in your ear? You'd really choose her? Becca's words tumbled out in a torrent of contempt. Brandon's patience had worn thin. His IQ was 150. His grandfather wouldn't have entrusted him with Shaw Industries otherwise. He had put up with their whims for years out of gratitude for what they did for him as a child. But that debt was paid. He was done letting them manipulate him. I have warned you. She's my fiancée. You will treat her with respect. If you can't manage that, I have no problem teaching you a lesson in manners. Brandon, are you serious? Tiffany said, a jealous edge to her voice. I told you, we could just play the game again. I'll make sure I draw the prize this time. Enough. I have no interest in your childish games. Brandon, cut her off. If you want to coddle Caleb, find someone else to be your pawn. Leave me out of it. Becca's expression cracked. You knew. She stammered. Brandon sneered. Of course, he knew. After his grandfather's party, he'd had the estate manager look into it. The whole twisted idea had come from Caleb, and they had eagerly gone along with it. The thought of it was sickening. It had extinguished any lingering affection he had for them. His wedding was just days away. He had no more time to waste on them. Taking Sarah's hand, he approached the sales associate they were scheduled to meet. The associate led them into the Black Diamond VIP lounge to retrieve their custom rings. They had just sat down when they heard a commotion outside. Ma'am, I've explained this already. This necklace was custom-made for Mr. Shaw. If you'd like one, we can place a new order for you. It will only take a few days. As for this set, I'm sorry, but we cannot sell it to you. The associate's patient voice was audible through the door. A moment later, Becca and Tiffany burst into the room. Why are you buying wedding rings? They demanded in unison. As if they didn't know. They were playing dumb. Even if they refused to believe what he'd said, the slightest inquiry in their social circle would have revealed that the Shaw family was in the midst of frantic wedding preparations. The truth was, they simply didn't care enough to find out. I believe I've made myself perfectly clear, Brandon said, his voice tight with frustration. Tiffany suddenly smiled as if a thought had just occurred to her. Brandon, I get it. You were buying the ring for me, weren't you? As a surprise. Becca, meanwhile, scoffed. Since you ordered all this jewelry, you should let Caleb try it on. Caleb tugged at Becca's sleeve. Becca, even if it's stuff Brandon doesn't want, I'm not worthy. Becca and Tiffany looked at Caleb with pity. Brandon, Becca said, you can't possibly wear all this. Just let Caleb pick something out. Tiffany was slightly more diplomatic. Brandon, you can't wear every piece at once. Just give one to Caleb. Brandon stared at them, a wave of disgust washing over him. He had never realized how utterly shameless they were. They were no better than thieves. Not only were the pieces designed for a woman, but even if they weren't, why on earth would he give anything to that manipulative leech? I paid for this jewelry. Why should I give it to him for free? As soon as the words left his mouth, Becca and Tiffany's faces darkened. Brandon, we're all human. Why do you look down on Caleb just because he's poor? Caleb was right about you. You're a snob. You won't even part with a single necklace. Even though Brandon had lost all hope for them, seeing them defend Caleb to this extent, abandoning all basic decency, made him laugh bitterly. I'd sooner put these jewels on a dog than give them to him, he retorted. Caleb said nothing, but his eyes welled up with tears. Becca and Tiffany were heartbroken. Don't be sad, Becca said, glaring at Brandon. I'll buy all of these for you. She immediately called for an associate to ring them up. In the ensuing chaos, Caleb walked over to Brandon and held up his hand, showing off a ring on his ring finger. See, Becca gave me this. She said, this is the kind of ring you only give to one person in your life. He even took it off to show Brandon the engraving inside. But Brandon was completely disinterested. Caleb buzzed around him like an annoying fly. blocking him and Sarah from trying on their own jewelry. Finally, Brandon had enough. He swung. His fist connected squarely with Caleb's jaw. Caleb stumbled back, stunned. When Becca and Tiffany realized what had happened, they grabbed Brandon, demanding he apologize. Brandon, that was completely out of line. Apologize to Caleb right now. Apologize for what? I was wrong, Brandon said suddenly. Seeing him admit fault, Becca and Tiffany's expressions softened slightly. But in the next second, Brandon's tone shifted. I was wrong to have been so blind. Wrong to have ever known the two of you. Sarah, we're leaving. This place is tainted. We don't want the jewelry anymore. He took Sarah's hand and turned to go. Becca, accustomed to always getting her way, lunged forward to block their path. Brandon looked calmly at the two furious women. Whether I can leave or not isn't up to you. Becca raised her hand to slap him, but her wrist was caught in a surprisingly strong grip. It was Sarah. Her slender fingers were like steel around Becca's wrist. No matter how much Becca struggled, she couldn't break free. You're a mute, Becca shrieked, enraged. A powerless nobody. How dare you interfere? I'm going to teach you a lesson today. As Becca raised her other hand to strike Sarah, Brandon's expression turned glacial. He was about to shove her away when the store manager rushed over with security guards. After stopping Becca, the manager turned and bowed respectfully in Brandon and Sarah's direction. Our owner has given explicit instructions, the manager announced. The jewelry in this store is for sale to Mr. Shaw and Mr. Shaw only. All other customers are no longer welcome. The manager glanced at Becca and her entourage, then barked at the security team. What are you waiting for? Escort these troublemakers out of the building. He then rounded on the sales staff. And you, what you paid for? Our most valued clients are being harassed, and you do nothing. He snatched the shopping bags from Caleb's hands. Caleb was livid. You're a business. You can't just refuse to sell to me. The manager was unmoved. At Aurelia, we can, and we do. Anyone who displeases Mr. Shaw is no longer welcome here. Caleb's face turned purple with rage, but he tried to save face. As if we'd want any of your junk anyway. Becca, as a prominent socialite, understood the power and prestige of Aurelia. Her face was pale. Mr. Quinn, I'm a loyal customer. I place orders here every year. You can't just cut me off. My apologies, Miss Vance, the manager said, his tone polite but firm, as he had the three of them removed from the store. Becca persisted. Mr. Quinn, who is your owner? I don't believe I've ever offended her. Could we meet with her? Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. The manager discreetly glanced at Sarah, who was focused entirely on Brandon, and said nothing. His expression turned to ice. You wish to meet our owner. You are not worthy. With that, he signaled for security to forcibly remove them. Once the drama was over and the unpleasantness gone, the manager turned to Sarah and reported respectfully, Miss, everything has been handled according to your instructions. Miss, Brandon looked at Sarah in astonishment. She was the owner of Aurelia, the person in charge of this entire luxury empire. Seeing his shock, Sarah quickly signed an explanation. She hadn't meant to hide it from him. She wasn't actually a waitress. She had just borrowed the uniform that day to avoid some minor trouble and had unexpectedly crossed paths with him, setting this whole series of events in motion. Brandon relaxed. It made sense. A regular person wouldn't have been able to get into his grandfather's exclusive birthday gala so easily. But if that was the case, he knew Aurelia was a century-old family business, which meant Sarah couldn't possibly be without a family. With their wedding so close, it was only proper that he visit her parents. However, a flicker of something unreadable crossed Sarah's eyes. She signed that she could make her own decisions about her marriage and that a visit to her family wasn't necessary. Her insistence told Brandon she was hiding something, but he didn't press the issue. He gently squeezed her fingers. Whatever you say. The previous incident had soured the original rings and necklace for Brandon. He decided to commission a new set. They selected new designs from a catalog, and the manager assured them with a smile, "We will have them delivered to your home as soon as they are ready." As they were about to head home, Sarah told Brandon she had to leave the Shaw estate for a while. She needed to go back to her own home to prepare for the wedding. She gave him an address. Brandon looked at it. It was in the city's most exclusive and expensive gated community, a place of sprawling estates and old money. Suddenly, he realized that Serafina Monroe's background was far deeper than he had ever imagined. When Brandon returned to the mansion alone, his grandfather was waiting for him in the living room. Seeing him looking dazed and by himself, the old man guessed what had happened. "My study. Now." Once inside, his grandfather asked, "Why are you back alone? Where's Sarah?" Brandon raised his hands to sign, then remembered who he was talking to and lowered them. "She went back to her own home," he said aloud. The old man's expression fell. "And will she be coming back?" Brandon was taken aback. "Grandpa, what do you mean? She just said she was going home to prepare for the wedding. Is there something wrong with her identity?" "So you've figured it out," his grandfather said, pacing slowly, his face unusually grave. "I won't hide it from you. I suspected from the beginning that Sarah was no ordinary girl, so I had her background checked. All I could find was that she went abroad at a very young age and only returned about a month ago. I also heard what happened at Aurelia today. Do you think a family that owns Aurelia is just your average wealthy clan?" This was the very thought that had been unsettling Brandon. His grandfather continued, "The most important thing is, besides the approximate dates of her departure and return, there's nothing, not a single record. That can only mean one of two things. Either Sarah is truly an orphan with no family ties, which we now know is impossible, or the only other possibility is that her family's influence is so vast, so far beyond anything I can imagine or access, that her identity has been deliberately scrubbed. That's why we can't find anything." Brandon stared at his grandfather, stunned. Even now, with him at the helm of Shaw Industries, he still saw his grandfather as an indomitable figure, a man of immense power and influence in their world. If even he couldn't find anything, then Sarah's family. Seeing the bewildered look on Brandon's face, and thinking of the deep, genuine connection he had witnessed between him and Sarah, the old man knew they truly cared for each other. He placed a hand on Brandon's shoulder and repeated a familiar sentiment. "Sarah is a good girl, and you know the Shaw family creed. We would never cancel this marriage because of her family's power. My fear is that Sarah may not have the final say in her own marriage. We, the Shaw family, may not be worthy of her. If the Monroe family were to object, there would be nothing the Shaws could do." Brandon knew his grandfather was only saying this out of concern for him. The knuckles of his clenched fist turned white. He nodded firmly. "I understand, Grandpa." That night, Brandon couldn't sleep. The next morning, he was up early, throwing himself back into the wedding preparations. After all, Sarah had said she could make her own decisions. And even if, in the end, he couldn't give up, he had to try. 3 days later, all the arrangements were finalized. A housekeeper brought him a potted plant. "Sir, this peony hasn't been watered in a long time. It's died." He looked at the white peony, a gift from Becca. He used to water it himself, but in the recent turmoil, he had completely forgotten about it. Perhaps their friendship, like the flower, had withered away from neglect and toxicity long ago. "Throw it out." As he spoke the words, he turned and came face to face with an enraged Becca Vance. 11. "Brandon, is that how you treat a gift from me?" Brandon frowned, his eyes taking in Becca, Caleb, and Tiffany. These three treated his home like a public park. "Someone get them out of here," he snapped at the staff. "And from now on, if you let this kind of trash wander in, you can pack your bags too." It was the harshest he had ever been with his staff, but everyone knew the words were aimed at his unwanted guests. Becca stepped forward anxiously and thrust a small box into his hands. "We came to give you these matching rings. Please don't kick us out." Brandon recoiled as if she were carrying a disease, his eyes cold. "I don't care about your rings. Give them to whoever you want. I don't want them." "Now, for the last time," he said, his voice rising, "get out." Becca and Tiffany exchanged a panicked, defiant look, about to argue further when Brandon's mother walked in, beaming. "Brandon, look who's here." Brandon turned. Behind his mother was the manager from Aurelia, and with him, a girl in a chic beige dress who looked utterly ethereal. With light makeup and her waterfall of dark hair cascading over her shoulders, she was breathtaking. Brandon felt a jolt. The girl looked familiar, but he couldn't place her. "It's Sarah, your fiancée. You don't recognize her just because she changed her clothes?" his mother teased. "To be honest, I was stunned when I first saw her too. She looks beautiful no matter what." Hearing the name, Serafina, Brandon finally allowed himself to truly look at her. The Sarah he knew was like a simple, elegant wildflower. The woman standing before him now was like a radiant pearl. They hadn't seen each other in 3 days, and an unfamiliar emotion stirred in his chest. He took a step forward, wanting to be closer to her. Sarah felt the same pull, but her eyes flickered nervously when she saw Becca and the others. She signed. "Why are they here?" "They're not important. Don't worry about them," Brandon said softly. He then turned his attention back to Sarah. "Are you here to see me?" Before Sarah could reply, the Aurelia manager spoke up. "You placed a new order for the wedding dress, rings, and other items. We have both the bride's and groom's attire ready for a final fitting." Brandon was surprised the manager also knew sign language, but then he remembered his deference to Sarah. Of course, he would learn it to better serve her. His gaze then swept over Becca's group, a cold smile touching his lips. The manager continued, his voice carrying for all to hear. "According to the original schedule, the formal proposal visit is tomorrow. We were wondering about your plans." This was partly for protocol and partly for the benefit of Becca and her friends. In reality, any visit from the Shaw family would be a mere formality. The Monroe family required no formal gifts. After all, there were only a handful of families in the world wealthier than the Monroes. Hearing this, Brandon's mother immediately pulled a lavishly bound book from her purse and handed it to Sarah. 12. "Sarah, dear, I know you said we didn't need to prepare anything formal, but some traditions are important," Brandon's mother said, opening the exquisite catalog. "I've put together a small bridal gift portfolio for you. Please, take a look, and if there's anything you feel is missing, just let me know." As she flipped through the pages, photos of dazzling jewelry filled the book, rare pieces from high-profile auctions and priceless heirlooms passed down through the Shaw family for generations. Following the jewelry were dozens of stock transfer certificates and property deeds. The portfolio was so thick it was hard to hold with one hand. Brandon watched, knowing full well what this meant. His mother was essentially giving half of the Shaw family fortune to Sarah. But he felt no objection. Sarah was about to become his wife. This was simply an introduction to what would soon be hers anyway. Sarah, recognizing the immense value of the gifts, was about to refuse when Becca lunged forward and snatched the book, her voice cracking. "Mrs. Shaw, are you giving away the entire family fortune? She's just a mute. Have you all gone insane?" Tiffany added more tactfully, "Mrs. Shaw, are you sure you want a mute daughter-in-law? The Shaws will become a national laughingstock." She then offered, "Or you could proceed with the wedding and just swap me in for her on the day of. We could just say she got cold feet." Smack! The sharp sound of a slap echoed through the room. Brandon's mother had struck Tiffany across the face. Everyone froze. "Normally, as an elder, I wouldn't lay a hand on you," Mrs. Shaw said, her voice dangerously calm. "But what you just said was utterly despicable." She snatched the portfolio back from Becca. "Let me make myself clear," she warned them. "Sarah is my daughter-in-law. She is the only daughter-in-law this family will ever recognize. Even if Sarah decided she didn't want Brandon and called off the wedding, he would remain single for the rest of his life before he ever married either of you. So, I suggest you give up now. And if I ever hear you call my daughter-in-law mute again, I will slap you every single time." She held up her hand, showing off her freshly manicured and very sharp nails. Tiffany's cheek was burning, but her skin wasn't broken. She knew Mrs. Shaw had held back. Clasping her face, she didn't dare say another word. Becca's face was crimson with rage, but she too remained silent. Caleb opened his mouth as if to mediate. "Mrs. Shaw, you shut your mouth." Mrs. Shaw snapped, her eyes filled with undisguised loathing. "Who do you think you are? We have no time for ungrateful leeches like you. Every word you speak shortens my lifespan. Security, get this trash out of my house and make sure they never set foot on this property again. I don't want them dirtying my doorstep." In her youth, Mrs. Shaw had been a formidable force among the city's matriarchs, and she had only grown more so with age. The Aurelia manager, who had clearly heard of her reputation, relaxed slightly, seeing how fiercely she protected Sarah. Mrs. Shaw had already taken Sarah's arm, treating her like a daughter, or perhaps a cherished friend. "Let me tell you, I never liked those three. You can just see the malice in them. Oh, your hands are lovely. Perfect for a manicure. though your natural nails are so beautiful, it would be a shame to damage them. Some of my friends use press-on nails. When you have time, I'll take you. We can pick some out together. And your hair, how do you keep it so silky? Don't worry, dear, take your time. I've been studying ASL for a week now, so I can understand if you go slowly. You make your own shampoo. How fascinating. Behind them, Brandon and the manager exchange a look. The manager smiled warmly. Brandon sighed with mock resignation. I think I've just been replaced. When I was a kid and didn't speak for years, my mom refused to learn sign language for me. She just said I'd talk when I was ready. The manager knew he wasn't truly upset and just smiled. But a thought about Sarah's muteness crossed his mind. He wanted to say something, but held his tongue. That was a matter for his young miss to reveal herself when she was ready. After his mother and the manager left, Brandon and Sarah were finally alone. Remembering his grandfather's concerns, he sat down across from her and began to sign. He spoke honestly about his past with autism and the risk of relapse, and he voiced his worries about her family, afraid her parents might object to their union. Sarah, sensing his anxiety, gently took his hand, her touch firm and reassuring. Brandon's unwavering loyalty and love over the past few weeks had convinced her she had made the right choice. She signed, "My parents know about you." In fact, she had told her parents about Brandon long before he even knew her name. They approve of us. They're on a trip around the world right now, but they're on their way back. You'll meet them on our wedding day. Don't worry. Everything will go smoothly. A wave of relief washed over Brandon. He looked at Sarah with gratitude, then threw himself into the final wedding preparations with renewed vigor. The formal proposal visit the next day was, as expected, a simple and pleasant affair. 3 days later, it was their wedding day. The news of Brandon Shaw's impending marriage had been the talk of the town for weeks, dominating headlines and social media feeds. To show how much they valued Sarah, the Shaw family spared no expense, booking the city's most luxurious hotel for a celebration that was set to be the event of the year. Early that morning, Brandon personally drove to Sarah's home to pick her up. The convoy of luxury cars drew crowds of onlookers, and Brandon and Sarah tossed small favors to the cheering people, sharing their joy. Then, as Brandon turned his head, he saw them. Becca and Tiffany. What were they doing here? The two of them were mixed in with the crowd, grabbing at the wedding favors. When they realized the groom was Brandon, their faces turned a sickly shade of green. The favors included not just candy, but also tiny gold nuggets, which caused a frenzy among the onlookers. Becca seemed to lose her mind, shoving her way through the crowd, trying to get to the wedding car. Brandon! Brandon! Tiffany was also being jostled, her usually perfect hair now a mess. Hearing Becca's cries, she shook her head in disbelief. How can this be happening? Why is he really marrying that mute? It was just a joke. Brandon coolly turned away, dismissing the interruption. He had made his intentions clear multiple times, but they'd been too arrogant, too certain that he was still the same puppet they could control. They couldn't fathom that he would ever truly defy them. Just as the convoy was 10 minutes from the hotel, the driver slammed on the brakes. Brandon quickly steadied Sarah, his voice sharp. What's going on? The driver's face was grim as he pointed ahead. Mr. Shaw, Miss Vance has blocked the road with her cars. Brandon rolled down the window. Sure enough, Becca and Tiffany were waiting for them, their cars parked haphazardly across the road, creating a chaotic jam of blaring horns. The two women walked straight toward Brandon's car. Becca yanked open the door and grabbed his arm. Brandon, how could you marry someone else? Tiffany, ever the strategist, turned to Sarah, her voice dripping with disdain. You're a waitress. A mute. You and Brandon are from different worlds. Don't let some stupid dare go to your head and make you think you're the next Mrs. Shaw. Get out of the car. Now, Brandon ripped his arm from Becca's grasp. You were the ones who wanted to draw for a wife. Now that I have chosen one, you have a problem with it? Brandon, it was just a game. Becca pleaded. You can't be serious. I know you're just mad at us. I got the ring back from Caleb. From now on, it's only for you. She held out her hand, but Brandon pushed it away. Don't waste your breath. I am marrying Sarah today. If you try to stop me again, don't blame me for what happens next. Becca, seeming to lose all reason, shrieked. She must be forcing you. Is that it? I'll get rid of her for you. She lunged towards Sarah. Brandon shielded Sarah, and Becca and Tiffany couldn't even touch the hem of her dress. Tiffany's eyes welled with tears. "Brandon," she whimpered, "you used to protect us." Brandon let out a cold laugh, his mind drifting back. For years, he had been their shield, their protector, the one who always rushed to their defense. But they seemed to have forgotten that he was made of flesh and blood, that he could be hurt too. Now, they weren't sad to lose him. They were merely furious that their human shield had chosen someone else, especially someone they looked down on. It was nothing more than wounded pride. His gaze hardened. "I told you before, we are done. The best thing you can do is stay out of my sight. I don't want my wife to feel insecure or upset." "No, you can't marry her," Becca screamed hysterically, seeing his resolve. She threw herself in front of the car. "If you want to get to that hotel, you'll have to drive over my dead body." Seeing her pathetic, desperate act, Brandon clenched his fists. She was really going to ruin the most important day of his life. "When you dragged Sarah into your game, did you ever stop to think this might be the outcome?" he roared. Becca flinched as if struck. A horrifying realization dawned on her. It's because of your family's creed, the one life, one love thing. That's the only reason you're marrying her, isn't it? Brandon gave Sarah a reassuring glance before turning his cold eyes back to Becca and Tiffany. "If I were to call off this wedding, I would be breaking that creed. I'd be disowned by my family. I would be a broke nobody with nothing to my name. Would either of you still want to marry me then?" Becca and Tiffany, who had been so aggressive just moments before, looked at each other and fell silent. After a long pause, Becca finally spoke, her voice lacking its earlier conviction. "Of course we would." "Enough." Brandon's voice cut through her lie like a knife. "Your silence was all the answer I needed." He stared at them, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and fury. "You defended Caleb at every turn because you were infatuated with his pretty face and sob story. But when you imagined me in his shoes, poor and powerless, you hesitated. That proves it. You never loved me. You only loved the idea of controlling the Shaw heir, the power and status it gave you in our circle." His words hit their mark. Becca and Tiffany flushed with embarrassment, their expressions confirming he was right. Still, Becca made one last desperate attempt, grabbing his hand. "Brandon, I do love you. If the family creed is what's stopping you, that's fine. Just tell everyone I was the one who drew the slip, that it was supposed to be me all along." Brandon just sneered. Tiffany had made the same suggestion at his mother's house and had been rewarded with a slap. It seemed Becca hadn't learned from her friend's mistake. Just then, another sharp smack echoed in the street. A bright red handprint appeared on Becca's cheek. Sarah was standing before her, her eyes blazing with a ferocity Brandon had never seen before. The Aurelia manager, who had appeared by her side, translated her furious signs. "This is for what you owe Brandon. I'm collecting the debt on his behalf." "You find this funny, Becca? When Brandon cared about you, you took his feelings and trampled all over them. Now you have the nerve to block his wedding car. What gives you the right? You were never worthy of his kindness. You're just a waitress. How dare you hit me?" Becca shrieked, lunging at Sarah, but Brandon and the manager instantly formed a protective barrier around her. It turned out Becca had brought her own security team to disrupt the wedding, but Sarah had come prepared. Her own security detail, larger and far more professional, swiftly neutralized Becca's men. They then dragged Becca and Tiffany to the side of the road and proceeded to systematically smash their luxury cars. "My Bentley, that's a $200,000 car. Sarah, you bitch, I'll sue you for everything you're worth." Sarah signed back nonchalantly. "If I can afford to smash it, I can afford to pay for it. You used your car to stop Brandon from marrying me. It was only right that I remove the obstacle. Who do you think you are?" Becca spat. "You're just a waitress." Sarah linked her arm firmly through Brandon's, her gaze unwavering. "As long as Brandon wants me, I can be anything." Tiffany, finally grasping the reality of the situation, changed her tactic. "Brandon, we know you're not doing this willingly. If you just call it off, we'll go with you and apologize to your grandfather and everyone else. The drawing was just a silly game. Don't throw away your whole life over it." "Yes, Brandon." Becca chimed in. "It's fine if you don't marry me, but you can't just rush into a marriage like this." They were now pretending to be concerned for his well-being, but Sarah held onto Brandon's arm. and he could feel a slight tremor running through her. She was nervous. All eyes were on him, waiting for his decision. Brandon took a deep breath. He gently unlinked his arm from Sarah's grasp, only to take her hand in his, holding it tight. Her palm was damp with a thin layer of sweat. When he spoke, her body tensed even more. "I will not abandon Sarah." Sarah's expression shifted from shock to disappointment, and finally to radiant joy. Brandon gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind Sarah's ear. "I will never forget that day at my grandfather's party," he said softly, his voice for her alone. "You were the only one who stood up for me. And when they forced this game on me, you stood by my side. Now, no matter what anyone says, I will not leave you to face this alone." Becca, hearing this, seemed to snap. Perhaps if she couldn't have him, no one could. She turned to Sarah, her smile twisted and ugly. "Don't get too comfortable. He's only marrying you because of some stupid family rule. He doesn't love you. A loveless marriage is doomed from the start." In response, Brandon lifted Sarah's hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly in front of everyone. His voice rang out clear and strong. "I am marrying Sarah because it was fate and because our souls connect. Her talent, her character, her kindness. I am captivated by everything about her. I love her, and I will until the day I die." A brilliant smile lit up Sarah's face. She tightened her grip on his arm and silently mouthed the words, "Me too." Their eyes locked, filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. They turned and walked away, leaving Becca and Tiffany to collapse into hysterical sobs, their pleas for him to stay fading behind them. With the road now clear, the wedding convoy quickly reached the hotel. To Brandon's surprise, the entrance was lined with a who's who of the business world, titans of industry from across the country, all clearly there for Sarah. They not only attended but had come out to greet her personally, their expressions a mixture of respect and genuine paternal affection. When their gazes fell on Brandon, their scrutiny was appraising but not critical. Feeling Brandon tense up beside her, Sarah gently squeezed his arm, her eyes communicating a simple message. "Today, you are the groom. This is your day." Brandon took a deep breath, centered himself, and walked with Sarah down the red carpet. Along the way, snippets of conversation from the guests began to paint a picture of Sarah's true identity. She was, he learned, the sole heiress of the Monroe family, one of the four legendary, almost mythical, founding families of the nation. The Monroes were known for their immense, old-world wealth and their intensely private nature, commanding a level of respect that bordered on fear. Thinking of his own childhood kidnapping, a direct result of the Shaw family's public wealth, Brandon suddenly understood the Monroes' secrecy and Sarah's humility. He realized he wasn't marrying her for her family, but for the person she was. With that thought, his posture relaxed, and his demeanor became natural and confident. When he finally stood before Sarah's parents in the grand ballroom, his bearing was respectful and poised. They, in turn, were clearly pleased with him. They knew he was a capable and talented young man, but more importantly, he came from a family with a strong moral compass. Most of all, they knew about the deep affection their daughter had held for him for years. Seeing the gentle patience in his eyes as he communicated with Sarah in sign language, just as their manager had reported, their expressions softened with warmth. However, as Sarah's father placed her hand in Brandon's, he said, "If my daughter wasn't so dead set on marrying you, I would have put you through a few more tests, young man. You'd better take good care of her." He then turned to the assembled guests and made a formal declaration. "From this day forward, Brandon is my son-in-law. And as they say, a son-in-law is half a son. That makes Brandon a member of the Monroe family." Everyone in the room understood the weight of those words. The message was clear. An attack on Brandon Shaw was now an attack on the Monroe Empire. They immediately voiced their support, welcoming Brandon as one of their own. Brandon took a moment to smile at Sarah, whispering, "Does this mean I've officially married up?" Sarah blushed and playfully tapped his chest, then explained. She was the youngest child, doted on by her family. But because she couldn't speak as a child, her parents had taken her abroad for treatment, where they had remained for over a decade. She had only returned a month ago. Just as Brandon was about to ask why she had come back, a stream of guests approached to offer their congratulations, and he was swept up in the celebration. As the groom, he was the center of attention, but the guests were considerate, knowing he had important duties to attend to later that night. The toasts were frequent but light. By the time the reception wound down, Brandon was pleasantly buzzed but still clear-headed. Sarah's parents were the last to leave. While Sarah was catching up with her mother, her father caught Brandon's eye and gestured for him to join him. "Did you know who she was before you agreed to marry her?" Mr. Monroe asked directly. Brandon didn't lie. "My grandfather suspected she was from an extraordinary family. He was worried the Shaws wouldn't be worthy of her, so he had a background check done. But he found nothing. Still, we both knew her family was far beyond our own." He tactfully omitted the part where Sarah had repeatedly deflected his request to meet her parents. Mr. Monroe studied him for a long moment, a look of approval in his eyes. "He's an honest one," he seemed to think. "And now that you know, what are your thoughts?" Brandon seemed genuinely confused by the question. "As long as your family doesn't object, what difference does her background make to our life together?" Mr. Monroe's expression remained placid, but his gaze was so intense it felt like it could strip a man down to his soul. Brandon felt the immense pressure of a man who operated at the very pinnacle of global power. Yet, his own gaze remained steady and unflinching. After a few seconds, the pressure subsided, and Mr. Monroe's face relaxed into a warm smile. "If you ever run into a problem you can't handle, have Sarah give me a call." He could finally, with a clear conscience, entrust his daughter to Brandon's care. With that, Sarah's parents declined Brandon's offer of accommodation and departed to continue their world tour. Sarah, accustomed to their nomadic lifestyle, simply took Brandon's hand, and they went home to their bridal suite. As Brandon was helping her remove the intricate ornaments from her hair, he returned to his earlier question. "Why did you suddenly decide to come back?" And he silently wondered, with her background, she could have had anyone. Why him? Sarah took his hand and, with her finger, drew a small, smiley face on his palm. For a second, Brandon was confused, and then the memory hit him with the force of tidal wave. He remembered. Years ago, on a business trip overseas, he had seen a group of men harassing a young waitress, mocking her for being mute and plotting to take her back to their hotel. He couldn't stand by and watch. He'd picked a fight with them to create a distraction. When it was over, he looked up and saw the waitress watching him. To reassure her, he had drawn a smiley face on the fogged-up glass of a window, a simple wish for her to be happy. He never imagined that girl was Sarah, or that she would remember it for all these years. After that day, she signed, "I took on all sorts of part-time jobs, hoping I might run into you again. I didn't want to come back home until my treatment was finished, but then my parents mentioned a man named Brandon Shaw who sounded just like you. I flew back just to see. That day at the party, I was running from some trouble of my own and had put on a server's uniform. When I saw you, I thought you might remember me, but then I walked into that horrible scene. Those girls were so cruel. How could they treat you like that?" Seeing her righteous anger on his behalf, Brandon's heart melted. He pulled her into a hug, feeling a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. You're even more beautiful now. But from now on, with you here, I'll never be bullied again." Sarah nodded firmly, her eyes sincere. "I will protect you." Brandon laughed softly and kissed her on the forehead. She shyly buried her face in his chest. He thought he had startled her and began to apologize, but she gently took his face in her hands and pressed her lips to his. After a moment of surprise, Brandon returned the kiss, deepening it with all the unspoken emotion between them. On their wedding night, their souls finally met, and they discovered a connection more profound than they had ever imagined. After the wedding, Sarah didn't want to be separated from Brandon by returning abroad for her treatment. So, Brandon hired her entire medical team and flew them to the States to continue her therapy at home. She lived a quiet life, rarely attending the lavish parties and events that were a staple of their social circle. Brandon, wanted to spend as much time with her as possible, also began turning down most invitations. One day, a business partner insisted they meet at the Bamboo Lounge to finalize a deal. The name sounded elegant enough, so after letting Sarah know, Brandon went. The private room was decorated in an opulent, traditional style. After they concluded their business, the partner took a call and excused himself, asking Brandon to wait. Brandon, seeing a tray of exquisite desserts, decided to stay and pick some out for Sarah. As he was looking at the menu, A figure draped in sheer silks appeared before him. He looked up to see a woman in a provocative, vaguely ancient-style costume moving toward him. Brandon frowned. Her face was hidden behind a veil. He was about to ask if she was in the wrong room when she began to perform a seductive dance. 19. For a split second, Brandon's mind went blank. Then, a spark of fury ignited. Who sent you? Was it Miller? That was his business partner. The woman didn't speak, only moved closer, her dance growing more suggestive as she let the silk veil slip from her shoulders. Just as her hand reached for him, he grabbed a heavy cushion from the sofa and hurled it at her. Even though she hadn't touched him, he immediately shrugged off his suit jacket and threw it in the trash can, his disgust palpable. The woman, stunned by his violent rejection, froze. Brandon held up his hand, flashing his wedding ring. "I'm a married man," he said, his voice laced with ice. "And even if I wasn't, I would have no interest in a woman like you. Get out, now." Hearing him say "a woman like you," she thought he had mistaken her for a prostitute and quickly tore off her veil. It was Becca. "Brandon, it's me." Maybe it was because she had never truly had him that she couldn't let go. Or maybe she had never bothered to really look at him before. Since the disastrous wedding day, he had been all she could think about. Seeing him now, she was struck by how handsome he was, not in a flashy way like Caleb, but with a deep, mature charm like a fine, aged whiskey. She finally understood what had kept her and Tiffany so captivated for all those years. But now that she understood he was married, it didn't matter. After all their years together, she couldn't believe he wouldn't be tempted, especially now that she was being so direct. "Brandon," she cooed, stepping closer. "It's been so long. I've missed you." Brandon's initial shock turned to white-hot rage. "Becca, have I not made myself clear? We're done. You know I'm married, and you still pull a stunt like this? What do you take me for? Some animal who can't control himself?" The room was filled with the sweet scent of incense, but all Brandon felt was a nauseating wave of disgust. He couldn't stay a second longer. As he turned to leave, Becca, a vicious glint in her eye, lunged to embrace him. He didn't hesitate. He kicked her, sending her sprawling to the floor. "Who gave you permission to touch me?" "Becca, you are a disgusting, filthy person." He suddenly understood. Miller had known she was coming. He had helped her set this up. Brandon pulled out his phone and called his now former business partner. He informed him that their deal was off and that Shaw Industries would be severing all ties with his company. Furthermore, he would personally ensure that every company friendly with the Shaws would blacklist them as well. It was a death sentence in their industry. The man on the other end of the line began to panic and plead, but Brandon simply hung up and blocked his number. 20. Becca, lying on the floor, was stunned by his ruthlessness. After debasing herself like this, to be rejected so completely, she finally broke down, screaming, "Is it because you love her? Or is it because of her family?" She had heard whispers about Sarah's powerful background on the wedding day, which only fueled her bitter resentment. So what if the Monroes are rich? "My family can help you too." What good is she? A mute you can't even take out in public. What can a woman like that, who just sits at home all day, ever do for you? So that was it. She thought she could win him back by appealing to his ambition. Brandon laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Let's be clear. Even if Sarah were the most ordinary woman in the world, she is my wife. I will be faithful to her until the day I die." Isn't that the most basic foundation of a partnership? Isn't that what separates us from animals? Just because you have no respect for commitment doesn't mean everyone is like you. Without another glance at Becca's pale, shattered face, he walked out of the room and straight into a pair of smiling eyes. Sarah was waiting for him. She had clearly been there for a while. Brandon quickly explained what had happened. Sarah listened calmly, not because she needed proof, but because they had made a promise to each other, to always communicate openly, to never let misunderstandings fester. When he finished, Sarah smiled and signed. "Becca was the one who texted me to come here. I knew she was trying to provoke me, but I trust you. I knew it would backfire on her spectacularly. So, really, I just came to watch the show." Seeing the mischievous pride on her face made her look even more enchanting. Brandon stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. "I am so lucky to have found you," he whispered. Sarah understood what he meant. Though she lived a private life, she was keenly aware of the world Brandon moved in. She knew about the so-called friends and colleagues who couldn't stand his integrity. They were constantly trying to drag him down into their world of casual affairs and empty pleasures, and were always rebuffed. In retaliation, they spread rumors that he was arrogant, uptight, or even that he had performance issues. Brandon hated the gossip, but he never wavered. To him, loyalty wasn't a choice. It was as essential and natural as breathing. And Sarah was the one person who truly understood that. They were, at their core, the same kind of people. However, the matter didn't end there. The disgruntled ex-partner, Miller, began a vicious smear campaign, claiming that Brandon's clean-cut image was a sham and that he had canceled their deal in a fit of rage after Miller had refused to procure him a prostitute. The story, with its dramatic reversal, caught fire online. Just as the rumors were reaching a fever pitch, a video surfaced. It was security footage from the private room at the Bamboo Lounge, showing Brandon unequivocally rejecting an advance. The Bamboo Lounge immediately issued a statement confirming the video's authenticity and stating that the woman had been brought by Miller. At the same time, Brandon's true friends and business partners came out in droves to defend him, citing countless examples of his unwavering integrity. The narrative flipped completely. The speech he had given Becca in the video went viral. He became an overnight symbol of loyalty and respect in relationships. Whenever someone tried to excuse infidelity with "boys will be boys," someone else would inevitably quote Brandon Shaw. And just like that, Brandon became known as the national husband, the gold standard of marital devotion. 21. Brandon knew, without a word being said, that it was Sarah who had orchestrated the swift and decisive counterattack. She was always there, silently clearing the path for him, which made him cherish her all the more. One day, he took her to a high-end furniture gallery owned by Aurelia to pick out some new pieces for their home. The moment they walked in, the manager rushed to greet them. "Miss Monroe, whatever you like, I'll have it sent to your home immediately." Before Brandon could reply on her behalf, a desperate cry echoed from another part of the store. "You can't do this to me. I have the money. I'll pay you back." Brandon turned to see Caleb Reed surrounded by several large, intimidating men. The manager sighed. "That man is a deadbeat. He used to come in with wealthy women, buy things, and then return them. We didn't look too closely at the returns, but then we discovered he was swapping them out for fakes. When we sent someone to collect the debt, he refused to pay." Brandon started to steer Sarah away, but Caleb's sharp eyes spotted him. He scrambled over and threw himself at Brandon's feet. "Brandon, please, you have to help Becca," he wailed. "Her family is forcing her into an arranged marriage. She's only doing it to save her family from ruin. I don't have enough money to save her. I know you hate me, but you can't let this happen to Becca. Please, lend me the money." Brandon was confused. An arranged marriage would probably be the best thing for Becca. Sarah had been merciful enough not to release the video of her at the Bamboo Lounge, preserving what was left of her reputation. At least with an arranged marriage, she would be financially secure for life. Seeing Brandon's hesitation, Caleb started shouting for all to hear. "You can't just forget about your old love now that you have a new one." His words immediately drew a crowd. "Look at that guy," someone muttered. "So well dressed, but he's a total scumbag. That poor man is on his knees. He must be desperate." Brandon just laughed coldly. "Are you asking me for money for Becca or for your gambling addiction?" Caleb flinched. "Of course it's for Becca," he stammered. I only gambled because I wanted to win enough money to give her a better life. So that's why you've been scamming a dozen different women, getting them to buy you things, and then pawning off fakes for cash. All for Becca's happiness?" The word gambling shifted the crowd's sympathy instantly. "Gamblers are liars, plain and simple," someone shouted. The manager stepped forward, "And he dares to slander our national husband." The crowd gasped. They had all heard the stories, but Brandon was famously private, and there were few photos of him online. Now, seeing him in person, they were starstruck. So that's him. He's even more handsome in person. In the commotion, Caleb tried to flee, but the crowd, now fiercely protective of their new icon, surrounded him. "How dare you try to ruin the reputation of the one good man left?" A woman yelled, and soon, Caleb was swallowed by a mob of angry citizens, from which he eventually escaped, bruised and humiliated. In that moment, Brandon realized that his commitment, the Shaw family's simple creed, had taken on a meaning far beyond his own life. He and Sarah chose their furniture and went home. The next day, he was surprised to see that a cleverly edited video of Caleb accusing him of being a love him and leave him type had gone viral. 22. The video was deliberately misleading, and for a short time, a segment of the online community, swayed by Caleb's looks and dramatic performance, turned on Brandon. But the backlash was short-lived. People who had been at the furniture gallery that day quickly uploaded the full, unedited video. Caleb was exposed as a liar and a manipulator. Soon, his entire history of scamming wealthy women came to light. The story snowballed, and Caleb, who had likely hoped to cash in on a wave of public sympathy, found himself at the center of a massive public shaming. His social media accounts were shut down, and the last Brandon heard, he was hiding out in a cheap apartment, too afraid to show his face. It was a fitting end for a man who had built his life on deceit. Just as the dust was settling, Tiffany posted a video of her own. In it, she tearfully confessed to being one of Caleb's victims. She claimed he had professed his love for her while bleeding her dry. The public, seeing her as a beautiful, wronged woman, flocked to her side. Capitalizing on her newfound fame, she offered a 20% discount on properties developed by her family's real estate company to all her new supporters. It was a brilliant move. The wronged woman narrative was compelling, and she gained hundreds of thousands of followers overnight, even boosting her family stock price. Brandon paid it no mind. He and Sarah were busy renovating their home, tailoring it to her tastes and habits now that he knew her so well. One day, as the project was nearing completion, he stepped outside to find Tiffany waiting for him, holding a large bouquet of flowers with several camera crews in tow. "Brandon, I've been waiting for you," she said, her face lighting up. "I came to apologize. I was wrong to believe Caleb's lies, and I did a lot of things that hurt you. But we grew up together. Even though you're married now, I'll always be like a little sister to you, won't I? Can you forgive me?" The camera zoomed in on Brandon's face. He looked at the impeccably dressed Tiffany. She was smart. She knew she couldn't play the seductress like Becca had. The public adored him as a devoted husband. So she was trying the sister angle, a classic move of feigned innocence. 23. Brandon looked from the bouquet of red roses in her hands to the cameras practically shoved in his face. "Are you really here to apologize?" he asked dryly. Tiffany nodded earnestly. "Yes. I hope you can forgive me." Brandon sneered. "Then why the red roses? I wasn't aware they were the international symbol for I'm sorry. And what's with the cameras? We knew each other a long time ago. That's in the past. I don't want to rehash what happened, but I have told you repeatedly that I want nothing more to do with you. As for being your sister, I'm an only child. I don't have a sister, and now that I'm married, I certainly don't need one. Please, do not disturb my life or my wife again. If you do, I will file a harassment complaint." Tiffany's eyes immediately filled with tears, a perfect picture of wounded innocence for the cameras. "Brandon," she whimpered, reaching for him. He sidestepped her touch. "Please respect my boundaries. And as I said, I'm not your brother. I prefer it if you use my full name. In fact, I'd prefer it if you didn't speak to me or come near me at all." His tone was final, but Tiffany, desperate for the attention, pressed on. Brandon finally laid her motives bare. "Have you no shame? Is this the kind of behavior your family taught you? Let me be perfectly clear. I don't care if you're trying to use me for publicity. You don't have my permission." As the cameras moved in closer, eager to capture the conflict, Brandon spoke loudly and clearly for all to hear. "My wife trusts me completely, so whatever you're trying to do here is a waste of time. But having a fly buzzing around my head is still annoying. You have 1 minute to leave this property before I call the police." And to prove his point, he pulled out his phone and dialed 9-1-1. The camera operators, realizing they were trespassing and that he was serious, began to back away, urging Tiffany to leave. She retreated slowly, casting long, mournful glances over her shoulder, playing the part of the heartbroken victim to the very end. Tiffany had expected the footage to cast her as the tragic childhood friend, but this time, the public wasn't buying it. In fact, the video had the opposite effect. People began analyzing Brandon's every word. So it's true. There are men who are immune to these kinds of manipulative games. Maybe the whole men can't help themselves excuse is just that. an excuse. The national husband lives up to his name. The public has spoken. When a few of Tiffany's remaining fans tried to argue that he was just putting on an act, that his coldness to his childhood friend proved he was incapable of true loyalty, it was like they had kicked a hornet's nest. An army of online sleuths began digging into Brandon's past, unearthing old videos and stories of his childhood with Becca and Tiffany. 24. I just watched some old home videos. Becca and Tiffany didn't treat him like a friend. They treated him like an errand boy. They made him miss his own games to run across town in the summer heat to buy them snacks, just so they could show off to their friends how obedient he was. Did they ever actually care about him? Poor Brandon. He was the heir to the Shaw fortune, and they treated him worse than the help. And he put up with it for over a decade. Those two are monsters. And that scammer Caleb was a Shaw Foundation scholarship student. It's the classic snake in the grass story. No wonder people are more willing to donate to animal shelters than to people these days. Did you see the story from a year ago? Becca and Tiffany ditched Brandon at a toll booth on the highway just to go hang out with Caleb. Those three are absolute garbage. The deeper people dug, the more dirt they found, not just about their treatment of Brandon, but about other instances of bullying and abusing their privilege. The scandal began to tarnish the reputations of both the Vance and Hale families, causing their company stocks to plummet. Against their dark backdrop, Brandon's integrity shone even brighter. The Shaw name became synonymous with loyalty and honor, and their business prospered. People online gushed about how lucky Sarah was to have found the one good man in the world. But Brandon, in a rare public statement, responded by saying, "There are many Brandons in the world, but there is only one Serafina." It was his way of saying that good men were not as rare as people thought. His grace and humility earned him a legion of male admirers as well. None of this changed Brandon's life. He continued to live quietly and happily with Sarah. They went on a long, secluded honeymoon. When they returned, they heard that Becca had married Caleb. It wasn't by choice. She had gotten pregnant. After her family discovered the pregnancy, her value on the arranged marriage market had vanished. They had forced her to marry the father of her child. The next time Brandon saw her, she was working at a greasy food truck. The arrogant, confident woman he had known was gone, replaced by someone tired and bitter. She took out her frustrations on Caleb, who was now a slovenly, unshaven man. "We have a customer. Get the food out now," she snapped. Caleb, resentful but still hoping to get more money out of her family, seethed in silence, slamming things around with barely contained rage. 25. Brandon shook his head. He finally understood Caleb. The man was a walking contradiction. He craved wealth, but was unwilling to put in the work or show the loyalty required to maintain it. He played the victim to get what he wanted, but despised the people he depended on. He had used a disgusting trick to trap Becca, and now they were living a miserable life together, a prison of their own making. Brandon gently steered Sarah away. "My wife is pregnant," he said to no one in particular. "She can't eat this." Even from a distance, he could hear their shrill, angry voices tearing into each other, scaring away the few customers they had. It was a sad, pathetic end, but it was the one they had chosen. A little later, in a public square, Brandon saw Tiffany. After her attempt to use him for fame had backfired so spectacularly, she had apparently decided to lean into infamy, attempting to become a hate-followed influencer. She was in the middle of a sexually suggestive dance for her phone when a park security guard chased her off. "Get out of here. We don't want your kind corrupting the children. If I see you here again, I'll smash your phone," she yelled. Tiffany scurried away in disgrace. Brandon felt no pity. Every person chooses their own path. He put his arm around his pregnant wife, and they continued their slow, peaceful walk. For years, skeptics and tabloids tried to catch them in a moment of weakness, convinced that no marriage could be that perfect. But 10 years passed, then 20. They celebrated their silver anniversary, then their golden, then their diamond. The so-called 7-year itch never came. Their love only deepened. Even after years of therapy finally allowed Sarah to speak, Brandon still preferred to communicate with her in sign language. It had become their private language, a world where only the two of them existed. One day, as they were preparing to go out, an elderly Brandon was helping a silver-haired Sarah choose a piece of jewelry. She gently pushed away a sapphire necklace he had picked out. Blue is for young girls, she signed, a playful smile on her wrinkled face. My beauty has faded. Brandon touched her cheek, his eyes filled with the same love as the day they first met. My love, he signed back. On you, even the world's most priceless gems look like fakes. Because you have always been, and will always be, the only masterpiece.